Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um Nomadcast, a série de podcasts e videocasts da Nomad, transmitida nas principais plataformas de streaming do país. Hoje a gente tem um episódio super especial, mas antes de apresentar o nosso convidado, eu queria agradecer a presença do nosso CEO, Lucas Vargas, que está aqui com a gente hoje.
Prazer estar aqui para a gente bater esse papo.
So now I'm going to switch to English because I'm going to introduce our very special guest, William Capuzzi, or Bill. Thanks a lot for being here, for accepting the invitation. It's a great pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you both for having me. It's amazing.
So let's start, Bill, with your career. So if you could start, telling us about your journey prior to joining and becoming CEO of Apex. How was that, and what is your current role as well?
Yeah. So try and give you the Cliff Note version. So I came out of undergrad as a young Web Pioneers kid, and I really wanted to become a doctor. But my family didn't have. There are 5 kids. We didn't have a lot of money, and so the thought of taking on more debt and becoming a doctor was just not going to be the case, at least for a period of time. So I went off, got my MBA. I worked for a university in the United States. If you worked for the university, you went to school for free. Finished my MBA, and where was the best place to go and make a bunch of money so that then I could go on to med school, go to finance. So I got into this MBA program at this investment bank called DLJ. And the plan was spend a couple of years and then, head to med school. DLJ actually owned a company called Pershing, which I know many Brazilians know Pershing. It was a clearing firm, this custodian, the back end of the inchworm, so to speak, the guts of investing. And I spent roughly a decade at Pershing and fell in love with our business, fell in love with sort of retail investing. And in particular, what I learned there is how hard it is, that the system is sort of set up for rich people. It wasn't necessarily set up for people that didn't have access to real wealth. So I left Pershing, helped found a company called ConvergeX. And at ConvergeX, we built sophisticated trading algorithms. That was my first entree into Brazil. And I was trading on behalf of large institutions in the United States. That was 2008, 2015, roughly. Yep. So the company was doing really well. We were trading all around the world. And in particular, within Brazil, we were trading ADRs, arbitrage, between the U.S. line and the ADR line. It was opportunity for big hedge funds and big long-only funds So many of the large brokers that were down here, Agora, XP, ICAP, there was a number of them that I used as a young person running that business. But the draw for me was back to my roots, back to Pershing, which is, hey, there's a better way to do this retail investing. And I got lucky. Apex formed in 2012, and it formed out of a failed company called Penson, which was a public company in the United States. And I was still running my other company, ConvergeX, at the time. And I knew what Apex could be. It was owned by this company in Chicago. They didn't really understand the business. And so I approached the owners of Peak Six, and I said, hey, I'll buy Apex from you for slightly more than you paid for it. They said no. We went back and forth, and I didn't convince them to sell me the company, but they convinced me to come across. And so Apex was this little, tiny, had no clients. We had virtually no employees. But again, from my roots sitting at Pershing and knowing what the opportunity was and the purpose of Apex, which is really fun for me, and the reason why I think this partnership with Nomad is so amazing is. The purpose of Apex is how do we help every person on the planet invest? And if you go back to 2012, 2013, even in the United States, it was incredibly hard if you had $500. The commission rate was $10 for a trade. There was no access, right? Because it was, Robinhood was, which was a client of Apex. They were just starting to get going. And so if you were a young person, how did you invest? And there really weren't a lot of good options, right? And I think over the course of the last 10 years, now we have roughly 250 different clients of Apex. Remember, we're purely B2B, so our partnership is a good example of what we do as a company. And we support roughly 25 million retail investors. Average age is in the 30s. Average account size is small, $10,000, right? So comparative to the Schwabs and the Fidelities, our focus, which is kind of stay true to our purpose, is helping people that didn't have a chance.
Nice. So you started talking a little bit about the customer profile, right? It would be good, given the context here.
Yeah.
You're in Brazil, so you're in São Paulo, and so it speaks to the priority that the country has to you and to Apex. Sure. And part of what we do here at Nomad, which is working with Brazilians as of today exclusively, is to help them also learn, it's the reason why we're here, about the opportunity. So if we could have from you a little bit more details on just the market in the US. And by the way, when in Brazil, we're talking about one exchange only, B3. So most people think, like, is there just one stock exchange in Brazil? So maybe there's just one there as well. So it would be good just to give this broad understanding of the industry there, size of the market, number of firms. It's just a good setup for us to get started.
So at least speak on the broker dealer side, and then we'll talk about advisors and the setup of the advisors and the way that the market works. So on the broker dealer side, there are roughly 5,000 different introducing or clearing brokers that have a license, and they're registered with FINRA, which is the kind of governing body for a broker dealer. It's a big number, right? On the advisor front, which is much more of the norm today, is far fewer brokers being created today than advisors, registered investment advisors who are governed by the SEC. You're talking about 50,000 different advisors.
Wow.
So the number in and around the States is significantly. And if you rewind the tape 20 years ago to today, that number wasn't reversed, but there were a lot more brokers than there were advisors. So 20 years ago, those advisors, 80% of how they made money was commissions. Today, 80% of how those advisors make money is they charge a fee, an AUM fee. The way that it works, just in terms of the ergonomics, so an end client in the United States opens an account, through eToro or SoFi or Webull, somebody who uses Apex. And if you're a retail investor, typically the order is routed and goes to what's called a market maker. So there is the exchanges, right? You have NASDAQ, you have New York Stock Exchange, you have some peripheral exchanges to that. But most of retail flow gets executed through a market maker. And the spreads are very tight, right? Roughly 1 to 2 cents, depending upon the
much more efficient than most markets in the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's very, and so I think we perfected how to. Used to be in quarters and halves, eighths. Now it's in pennies, and for liquid stocks, typically the spread's a penny. So it's very, very good pricing, right? And there's a lot of liquidity. And then the second part is we're now in a T1 environment. Right, so I sit on the board of DTCC. DTCC is sort of that central clearing hub that sort of sits between broker dealers. So there's a buyer on one side, there's a seller on the other. DTCC acts as that central clearing hub between the two brokers. And anything you buy today is settled tomorrow. Right, and again, let's rewind the tape. 10 years ago, it was T+3, and that just happened last year, and pretty much without a hiccup. Right, moved to a T+1 environment. So it's a very efficient process today. If you rewind versus what it was, going back 10 years. If you had money, it was access.
Yeah.
But 10 years ago, if you had $1,000, you really didn't have many opportunities to invest in the U.S. market. Today, I think in large part due to folks like Apex, there's great opportunity. Which is, like you said, why am I here? There's that same opportunity. I can see parallels to the way the U.S. set up, 10, 15 years ago to how the Brazilian market is setting up today.
Yeah. Bill, can we sort of further explore the financial advisors market and, to give you more context, right? In Brazil, maybe we have the opposite, right? 90% of the Brazilian market is structured, the financial advisors market is structured in a model similar to a franchise in which all those different third-party offices, they sell products and they earn rebates from selling those products, right? It seems that here in Brazil now we are seeing both a market movement and also the regulator is sort of pushing with new regulations to have more transparency and eventually to, bring more professionalism to this market, right? If we look at, to the US and we try to compare, what were the triggers in your opinion and how long did it take, for that reversion to happen?
Yeah. So you can, rewind literally 20 years ago. So it's 2005 in the United States. Like I said before, roughly 80% of advisors charge commission, right? Fast forward today, that's opposite. Now it's 80% charge a fee. So how do we get from here to there? And really there were three main drivers. The first was just regulatory, right? And part of it was there's an inherent conflict, quote unquote, inherent conflict of interest where if you're getting paid for transactions and you're pushing clients to make more transactions, they may not necessarily be in the best interest of the end client. So there was a lot of push from the SEC to say, hey, we need to change the way that this works. And the easy way...
By the way, it seems that it's the moment that we are living at this point, right? So 20 years different, but it seems that this is the moment in Brazil right now.
And look, it makes sense, right? Which is for an advisor, if you think about it, move to a fee structure, it kind of unshackles you to make prudent decisions that you think are right for that client without having to worry about notion of churning or inducing certain transactions. And so that was a big push. Interesting, I think it's the same here. The big pushback from the advisor industry is like, oh my goodness, we're going to make less money, right? And fast forward, and I think there's incredible parallels between the Brazilian market and the U.S. market. When you think about the amount of assets that moved into advisory, into this fee-based, it's not even a close comparison. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. And it kind of brings to the second point why this happened is just, client demand, right? Clients demanded transparency. They wanted to understand, and it was just simple for them to understand, hey, I got charged an AUM fee, and I don't have to worry about the number of transactions or what's happening behind the scenes. And that person now takes on what's called a fiduciary responsibility, which is everything in my portfolio. They understand me, my wife. They understand what's important to us, my investment, how long I'm looking to invest. And this portfolio should reflect my investment thesis as an individual without worrying about how many funds or how many trades and all that. And it's worked. And then the last part, which I think is driven, I'll get into the reason why our partnership is really important related to this is it was expensive to do all those transactions 15 years ago, right? And so now you're in this position where, yes, there's maybe fewer transactions. So like the explicit fee they think that they're making because it's not commission-based, but the cost associated with each one of those transactions is a fraction of what it was in the past, right? And the friction has come out. So your margin on that portfolio, if you're an advisor, is better. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the opportunity here in Brazil is you're going to see more assets come to you because it just logically makes a lot more sense to charge a fee versus, a commission.
And of course, technology has played a big role in that transition or in that evolution of the advisory market. And in every industry, there's this discussion of the impact of Gen AI, which is a next level of technology. So I would like to get your opinion on how do you see wealth management now with this next era of evolution, the impact of Gen AI?
So we have at Apex, and counting 790 different experiments using AI throughout the firm. And the way I push as a CEO is it's everyone's responsibility around the company to lean hard into AI. And if you spend time and encourage your audience, is like learn the underlying technology and use it. Every single person at Apex theoretically could be an engineer, could actually code today. right today in today's version of AI, which is amazing to me. And so then when you think about how you service clients, you think about how, from our business, fraud detection. We think about how, we're talking the interaction in terms of the connection of Nomad to Apex in terms of the APIs. The interaction there can happen a lot more seamlessly. So it will disrupt every part of our business. And I think, and I think it's going to accelerate a bunch of things that I think were going to happen 5 to 10 years. I think are going to now happen in the 3 to 5 year range. If you rewind in the US, there was this notion of robo-advice, and it never went anywhere. And in part because it was like this weird kind of left turn. It's like, okay, you as a client are going to have a totally digital experience and not have a human. And it was both rejected by the investor base, and it was rejected by the industry largely. Because if you're your advisor, you take pride in the fact you have a relationship with a person, this robo thing is going to disintermediate my relationship with the end investor. I think AI is going to help push these things closer together, right? And it's going to create this real hybrid model, which is self-serve, create opportunities for that individual to actually interact with their portfolio on their sort of basis versus ours. It's like, how do you want to interact and see things and be able to ask regular questions and get real answers? But when I need somebody, right, a real person to step in, hey, I had a child, or I'm sending my kid to college, or I'm looking at sending them over from Brazil into the US to go to college. That's when you need somebody to step in and help coach you through certain circumstances. So I see this playing through where a lot of what we do manually is going to turn into something much more automated.
This is very interesting. You mentioned the robo-advisor as, hey, maybe this was too much, right? Let's go back here. And now Gen AI is kind of in between what people thought the industry was going to look like. Let me shift then to another technological shift, which is tokenization. Mm-hmm. There has been a lot going on, right? And Robinhood announced last week some of their efforts, their products, and their vision.
Yeah,
I would like to get your vision there as well, because there's still definitely not a clear path that the whole industry is supporting. So it's still, I would say, maybe an experimental phase. And as you mentioned, robo-advisor, maybe I thought for you to share here your own opinion about everything that is happening would be good.
Yeah, I have strong views on this. I think if we fast forward out there, 5-10 years, I think there's application for this technology. Think about blockchain. It's an immutable sort of record of someone's ownership. And you think about the technology and how it works for crypto, which, I built a crypto business as part of Apex. So we really understand the underlying technology. It is amazing, right? The challenge in the short run is, what's the utility of tokenizing? Let's just take a U.S. public security, right? What's the utility? Right? It works pretty damn well. We talked about, penny spreads. We talked about the cost to actually move money around is real time now, and accessing the markets. There's very little friction. Everything is electronic, at least through Apex. Opening accounts, there's no paperwork. Confirm statements are all electronic. And then lastly, there's rules. There's real rules in and around how you can transact in a public security in the U.S. Right, so you think about, okay, how would tokenization work? This notion where you have to live in sort of this TradFi land, you buy a security, it then gets turned into a token. What do you do with the token? All right, so now you have it on a dongle and you're walking around and you have your entire portfolio on this thing. One is the risk, okay? I think the second part is, what do you do? There's not much you can do. It's not like you can transfer it to another person. You have to get it back into TradFi land to then turn around if you wanted to sell or do something within any of the securities. So I think there's work, right, to be done. Apex can support blockchain. So when this starts to really get going, the big banks have a really long way to go. So for me, at least in the short run, I think it's really good marketing fodder around tokenization of public securities. Again, the utility for retail investors still has a long way to go. So that's the public security side. I think the private security side, the utility is much greater. So there's a lot of momentum, a lot of interest in private securities. So let's just say it's Apex. Apex is a private company. Okay, we have shares that all of our employees have at Apex. I want to go raise money as Apex. Okay, I have options. My option historically has been go public, IPO. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of costs. It's not a very efficient process. But it was really the only path to raise real money for a company, right? Now you have this private path, which is you can go out to investors and people can invest in your company privately. The problem is it doesn't work like the public markets. There's no transparency into the pricing, the access to, how would you even know how to get to Apex? Because it's a very opaque market. Tokenization of a private security is interesting because there is no DTCC, there is no public exchange, right? And so there, I think, has real utility because not just because, hey, you can walk around with a dongle that has Apex stock on it. That's less, I think, the utility. I think the utility is more in how do you standardize all of the public or private securities that are out there and make it such that they all kind of fit into a standard way that, a retail investor can now look in the total universe of private securities that are available and do a transaction that's going to be really simple. The costs and the friction in terms of you, retail investor, actually buying Apex shares is massive. Tons of paperwork and tokenization allows you to actually create a much more efficient process for a private security. So my bet is that'll probably be the first real application, which was sort of what Robinhood was doing when they were talking to OpenAI.
Your stunt was with two of those, right? With SpaceX and OpenAI.
The funny part was that, the news after that, they didn't actually, OpenAI came out and said, hey, what,
exactly. That is what I was going to say. You have multiple stakeholders for it to work.
But follow that example, which is if it was all on token, if it was all on chain, OpenAI would know exactly because there's immutable. Yes. You understand exactly who owns the transaction and can follow the path to how somebody like Robinhood would say, hey, I have shares that I can sell, right? Because they would see that, hey, OpenAI had a investor that sold a block of their stock on the private market. Somebody at Robinhood bought those shares and redistributed. That's a great example of where it could really actually add value.
Just one comment, I totally agree. And I think Robinhood agrees with that as well, precisely because the two examples that they brought were those two private securities. But at the same time, they say, hey, but for us to get liquidity, for us to get started, which is going to be maybe phase 2, we have first to start with the public. And then it's where things get still not clear
it also
how
sounds,
to get traction, right?
It sounds really sexy.
Yeah.
Right? If you start talking about tokenizing a public security, the sex appeal of it, the marketing of it sounds really amazing. Just the reality is the utility when you actually get to the details is like, okay, that, because I'm a back of the inchworm guy. I'm a plumbing person who understands the plumbing really well. It's going to be a while until we get from here to there.
Let's continue to explore the alternatives market because obviously we follow you on social media.
Yeah.
And we saw an announcement of an alternatives platform that Apex is putting together, right? So can you share more about this product and probably, within the next months, that's going to be available for, the Nomad customers, right?
So, and it ties a little bit into what I was talking about with tokenization. One, the demand continues. Historically, Apex's clients didn't have the means to start buying into alts. Now the clients are starting to grow up, have more money. So, that's one part that's driving, the push for us. But the second is, and it kind of goes to our DNA as a company, which is how do we, there's got to be a better way, right? So we started a company, we looked at how do you open an account, and it was like, okay, paperwork, and there were stickies on it, and you had to sign it with a pen, put it in a FedEx, and send it. That's literally how it worked. And Apex was like, there's got to be a better way. The same with alts, which is the process for a retail investor to sort of go through the process to become accredited, right? So it's kind of a wacky process of how people get sort of accredited. I think there's a lot of push to actually change the rules in the U.S. around accreditation, because effectively it's how much money do you have in a bank account as to whether or not you are a sophisticated investor. But let's put that aside.
By the way, I think it's the same rule that we have in Brazil. So it's kind of similar. And when you talk about accredited investors, we have the qualified investors in Brazil. It's
and look, there has to be some standard, because some of these things are illiquid. Some of them are not great investments. And you want somebody that has some sort of qualification. With that said, just being it based upon how much money in an account doesn't necessarily mean you're a sophisticated investor. Anyway, but the process to actually create accreditation is just clunky, right? Let's go back to how you open an account. It's paperwork and stuff. Why could somebody supply APIs, right? Which are basically electronic means that Nomad takes our APIs, plugs it into their front end. So a customer that's on Nomad can hit the little button on the bottom that says, do you want access to alts? Yeah, sure. Press the button. It goes through a series of questions for that person. If they answer the questions based upon accreditation, it then fires through Apex's APIs. Boom, we give back, yes, you're approved. Okay. The second part of it is now you're, okay, great, you're accredited investor. The world of alts is special snowflakes, and they're everywhere. They're all in little pockets. How did Robinhood get access to those OpenAI shares? Right? There's no really standard way. And each one has a different subscription agreement. And so the process is really clunky, right? So the back end of what's called Apex Alts is to standardize all of those alts that are out there, right? Sort of herd the cats of sorts. So the experience for a Nomad client is they come onto the app, they say, hey, I'm interested in alts. They press the button, they do the accreditation. And as soon as they comes back and says, yes, you're accredited, what do you want to take a look at? Let's show you the menu of all the alts that are available. You click on the alt, it gives you back the subscription agreements electronically. Mm-hmm. You can read through them. Yes, you understand the risks, you understand the terms. I want to buy into the KKR, sort of private equity fund, growth fund. Put $10,000 in, and off you go. Yeah. So it really is around. This is the reason for the company is how do you reduce friction and create access to things that, frankly, historically have always been for rich people.
What are the opportunities there in terms of the different asset classes? You mentioned some companies pre-IPO, which I think is great. Maybe ability to invest in VC or PE.
Yeah.
Are there potentially other asset classes like, I don't know, maybe real estate and other different stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So, and the way we built the platform is there's standard ways to get access to there's a DTC AIP platform that you can connect into. It gets you a series, and then there's a series of other platforms, ICAP, Case, and then the last option is Nomad has access to an apartment building in Brooklyn and wants to create an SPV, what's called a special purpose vehicle, and sell that apartment or a fraction of that apartment to individuals. You can do that today, right, through our platform pretty simply. So whether it's real estate, you mentioned VC, private equity, any one of those funds is now theoretically available to clients. Now, it has to go through the accreditation process. Apex, our job partly as a custodian is safe, secure. So it has to be done right. But assuming it's done right, why shouldn't people that are on the Nomad platform have access to what has historically been for rich people?
We could be talking here like forever, right?
But yeah, unfortunately, we have to keep this short. So yeah, we should start to wrap up, right?
I think so. Yeah. I really, just one final comment from my side, at least. I think this partnership started with the fixed income platform, which I think it's a great innovation for Brazilians to have access to fixed income in the US and US dollars, right?
Yeah.
We are discussing about how to also offer that with lower minimums.
Yeah.
So probably within the next months, we'll have some news as well.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I think, that's it. We've been very happy with the partnership. And again, thank you very much for being here today.
Look, I appreciate the partnership. with folks in Nomad, and it's fun for me to watch you two and your team disrupt the industries, create something that's actually helping people in Brazil, right? And again, I'll make the parallel to the U.S. market. It seems like it's happening once again. I saw this movie 10 years ago, and here we go again. And you think about the 250 million people here. When you think about the mass affluent people that are just trying to kind of figure out how to save for the future and then create some sort of security, Nomad is doing that, which is amazing to me. So I appreciate the partnership, and I'm looking forward to us doing much more fun things in the future.
Great. Thanks, Bill, for the partnership. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, of course.
And see you soon.